A man vomited, leaning over the ship's rail. Wiping his mouth, he muttered an expletive in Czech. He had been born near Praga, was traveling with his family aboard a large ocean liner, a hellish crossing, 9 days of storms and rough seas, from Bremen to Hoboken, New Jersey. The man never thought he would see the New World, but he had received an offer he could not refuse, and more importantly, a seemingly impossible mission. It was 1892. Composer Antonin Dvořák absent-mindedly looked westward, and in the distance appeared in the fog the liberty enlightening the world. Symphony No. 9 from the New World begins with a long stormy introduction. In this somber atmosphere something stirs. It is the shadow of a theme hinted at by horns and cellos. After a laborious crescendo, this dark shadow emerges into the light. It is the first theme of the symphony. The oboe repeats it even more forcefully. This momentum of the oboe gives courage to the entire orchestra, which slowly wakes up, grows until it explodes, reiterating the theme in all its power. It sounds like the ringing of a military charge, seems to revisit the Union soldiers on horseback as they routed the Confederate Army at the Battle of Gettysburg. Dvořák had been invited to America by Jeanette Thurber, a wealthy patron of Manhattan's upper class, to conduct the National Conservatory of Music in New York, which she had just founded. Jeanette had offered him $15,000 a year, 25 times what Dvořák earned at the Prague Conservatory. The composer had 2 children and could not refuse. His mission was to found an all-American musical idiom, to compose something that was genuinely deeply American. There was only one problem: the New World had no learned musical tradition to draw on. The first movement of the 9th Symphony is a sonata form. After the heroism of the first theme, we hear a mysterious modulating theme. We seem to observe red skins moving silently through the trees of the North Carolina forests. And finally the second theme appears, delicately hinted at by the flute. In this theme, we seem to hear the characteristics of an African American song. It is vaguely reminiscent of the spiritual Swing Low Sweet Chariot, written many years earlier in Oklahoma by a freed slave, Wallace Willis. Spirituals were the religious songs of African American slaves. One day in the halls of the New York Conservatory of Music, Dvořák heard a warm baritone voice ringing out. The composer instinctively followed its sound. Singing was a cleaner Henry Burley, an African American singer of spirituals. Henry was studying at the conservatory and paid for his studies by cleaning the halls. Director Dvořák could not fail to notice him. The African American and the Bohemian became friends, and Henry introduced the composer to the black tradition of spirituals, from which Dvořák drew inspiration for many of his themes. The 21st of May, 1893, in the New York Herald, the composer published a futuristic article, "The Real Value of Black Melodies." In the melodies of the blacks of America, I could find all that is needed for a great and noble school of music. They can be tender, passionate, melancholy, vigorous. There is nothing in all the variety of composing that cannot be said with these themes. At the beginning of the second movement of the Symphony from the New World, over a soft carpet of strings playing with the mutes, a wonderful theme entrusted to the English horn unfolds. It is a melody evocative of Native Americans. It is based on the pentatonic scale, typical of many folk traditions. In June, Dvořák had made a trip to Iowa, crossed the Mississippi River and settled in Spillville with some Czech friends. There he had listened to Native American music. The sound of the English horn represents well that of Indian flutes. Dvořák at that time was reading the Song of Hiawatha, an 1855 poem by Henry Longfellow. This movement is inspired by an Indian funeral rite described in the poem. In the finale, we almost hear the heroine Minnehaha's spirit breaking free into the air and reuniting with nature. This wonderful theme of the second movement has entered the American imagination and has been arranged in a number of famous spirituals from early on. Same poem, the Song of Hiawatha, was also the inspiration for the scherzo, the third movement of the symphony, in which we witness a dance in the forest. The beginning is a playful quote to another famous Ninth Symphony. If you recognize it, please write it in the comments. This third movement will also leave a mark on American culture. Compare it to the Phantom Menace score, written by John Williams about 100 years later. Are you disappointed? Perhaps it is only because you have never heard the soundtrack of the movie King's Row of the year 1942. The final movement of the New World Symphony begins with a series of somber arcs that get more and more pressing. Strange, I feel like I've heard them before. The final theme of the symphony, Dvořák's The Ace in the Channel, is a heroic fanfare of trumpets, the most American theme ever written. Think of Blackfeet riding chasing bison in the endless Montana marathons, or Old West bandits assaulting a stagecoach. At the premiere of the symphony on December 15th, 1893, in the New York Philharmonic, the audience began to applaud before the end. They all stood up. It had been a triumph. A Czech composer had done the impossible, had invented classical music in the New World. I am Francesco, and on my channel I talk about music and art. I remind you to support me by subscribing to the channel or donating to the links in the description. And if you, like me, feel that this is definitely the best content on YouTube Italy and beyond, subscribe and share. We are almost at 17,000. The spirit of this channel is to renew a cultural system that is now worn out, stale, the child of a university in shambles, in the hands of sordid bureaucrats. Escape from a country in which we find no place and which, after all, does not deserve us. Let us ride free westward to the conquest of a new frontier.